In this last talk of belonging, in a community of God's people, belonging to a church, eh, let us recognize that some of you might be new Christians and some of the things I've been saying might sound strange to you. And it may be that you want to come and listen to these after you've been going to church for a period of time. I can understand that. There's many of these things that I worked out at. I do remember very, very much being in this lovely little church, which was a Christian Brethren church called Plymouth Church in the United States. And as you know, I'm belong to the Church of Jesus Christ that is universal and eternal. And I don't condemn anybody for what particular denomination they've been brought up in and accustomed to, or the way they practice. Um, I will just simply tell them what I believe the Bible teaches in a loving way, kind way, never condemn anybody. That's who I am. There are other people who can speak much clearer and with much more clarity on conviction truths that which I don't have, but I acknowledge that other people do and respect them for it. I don't disrespect them for it. When we're sharing things together, um, it's important that we do come to that position in our lives in which we say something like, what does it mean to work together in a church fellowship? And there are four things that should mark out a church, whatever else takes place in a church. And each church development are different, but there are four distinguishable marks that stand out. And one of them will bring me back to one of my first talks. But it needs to be a local church. Second, it needs to be a caring church. Third, it needs to be a witnessing church. And fourth, it needs to be, back to one of my first points, a growing church. This has been a difficult one to call a local church because most of our churches are no longer local. They become city churches, and people have come to the church from a long distance. No longer can people walk to them, or in the old days, get on their horse and go to them. We now have to get in a car and travel. And in our church, which I belong to, some people travel 20 miles. I wouldn't be at all surprised if some traveled further than that. This doesn't make them a local church. Neither does it make them a caring church for the community. It's the community is not their mission field. They've come to a church for whatever reason, maybe for teaching or sharing or being part of that kind of fellowship. What they've not been is coming to a local church. And so I find this talk difficult. However, if we're talking about what the Bible teaches, it talks about a local church. The church grew in people's homes for the first 400 to 500 years. The establishment of buildings as such that would become the norm, I don't think happened until about 500 years later, after Christianity started. When you had a meeting, the houses were so close together. If one house was full of singing and joy and reading the scriptures, quoting testimonies, prophesying, and all the things they did in that house, everybody in the street would hear, and they would come in and look into the small house where 15 to 20 people would be crushed together, as it were. And suddenly another house would open up, then another one, then another one. And before long, a lot of the houses in the street or the village or the hamlet or the town and the city would have Christians growing like anything. They were local. If I was to offer any advice to our leadership today, and I would offer it sensitively and humbly from the scriptures, I would say when anybody comes to you for membership into your church, when I say your church, I mean your congregational church, I would say to them, yes, you are happy to come here as long as we can open an evangelizing home group in your home. We'll send you how to start it. This would mean that there would be still a local church in a person's home, 20 miles away, 10 miles away, 5 miles away. And so you'd have your church for the large meetings of getting together, and all the way around you, you would have regular meetings, maybe once or twice a week, in these evangelizing churches. That would bring about revival, I suggest. And also, in those small groups, you would have to have your elders and your deacons there in the home group. And you'd have to have pastors and teachers there in your home group. And you're becoming a pattern that you find in the New Testament. If you don't believe there were these home groups, just read the last chapter of Romans and you'll see what I mean. And at the end of other books as well, the church in your home is mentioned so many times. So it is to be a local church. And that means major surgery in many of our churches. Some of us were hoping that with this advent of this virus that's gone round, the interruptions it's made in church life on a big scale, maybe more home churches will be grown out of that and developing. I don't know. Maybe it won't, maybe it will. But some people are hoping for that to take place. A local church is to be a local church. If you are a person who travels 10, 15, 20 miles to a church, be challenged and say to yourself, what can I do to be a help to turn the community around the church into a mission field? I don't have to go the other side of the world, but I can go into the place where my church is and into the people round about it. What do I have to do? How do I have to volunteer? Did you know that when we do a distribution locally, I'm told again and again they have difficulties getting volunteers. And we're a church of 400. Difficulties to get volunteers. We need to be a local church. And we need to rediscover some things of the meaning. If we are a body of Christ, it's no use having a leg over there and an arm over here, a head over there and feet over there, is there? We need to be a body of Christ locally. A caring church. I have only found in my experience caring churches in small to medium churches. I have found to my great joy caring Christians in a large church, but somehow it seems difficult to get a caring community atmosphere in the large church. Where churches have regular and good home groups, there can be a caring atmosphere in those home groups. Where churches have regularly a certain style of meeting that has a cake and a tea or a coffee and conversation, they can develop a caring. The reason why I say it's difficult for a larger church to be caring, because I've seen too many people fall through the net, and they wouldn't have fallen through the net if they were in a smaller church. People with cancer and suffering with it. People with other things that are wrong with them. People who've had problems with their children. And there's been a lot of things like that. A caring church. It's also a church you cannot call a partnership church, a fellowship church, a partnership church and a fellowship church if it doesn't witness. And there are various styles of witness. First, there's the education of the church to witness personally in their families, in their schools, in their colleges, in their workplace, in their daily life. They're witnessing churches, individuals, and that's important. That's very important. And can I suggest and make a plea that in the witnessing church of individuals, that the leadership puts into the hands of the individuals a range of literature or videos or whatever that will help them to witness and to teach and to share and to be gospel people. My own company creates a wide range of stuff that can be used for Christian work in their daily lives. Most days, I don't always, but most days I always take something with me when I'm going out, because I know I'll meet somebody who doesn't know Jesus and I can pass on to them maybe a New Testament that's in easy reading, New Testament, or maybe it's a yes book I want to believe, or maybe it's what we've got is the combined Gospels, or even an individual Gospel, or maybe it's a Jesus book by Michael Green, one of the last books he wrote before he was transferred to glory. Something to pass on to people, something of quality that says you care, not something cheap and nasty, but something that says you are important. I love you. I care for you. I'm pleased to meet you. Take this. There'll be more people in God's kingdom because of personal witnessing than you can ever imagine. Then there is the witnessing of the church that is done in its home groups. Many of our home groups are good at being pastors and good at doing a Bible teaching and good at praying, but not good at witnessing. Why not have a small card that you can distribute locally saying we're meeting at such and such and we'd like to pray for you. What would you like us to pray for? And then if you want to join us, join us. Do something to become a witnessing home group as well as a pastoral Bible teaching, encouraging home group, of which we thank God for. But a church should also be a witnessing church. I remember some years ago in our church now, a person in the church who came to see me saw other people as well, and he was wondering whether we should start a movement in Bath called One by One. And it was simply having people going out into different assemblies of the schools around us to take the assembly from a gospel Christian perspective. And that's been being done now for X amount of years, and it's one of the most pleasurable things that we're rejoicing in our particular church, witnessing church. But we need to be a witnessing church. We ought to go back to having some meetings that are gospel meetings, that we turn an entire weekend, maybe once a month, to a gospel effort. And we plan these things back to your organizers and leaders, that we want to be a witnessing church. And we ought to need to have literature that we can give out to the community on a regular basis. We ought to be in touch with the people of the community at least once a fortnight. Sometimes it's once every 5 years. Sometimes it's not at all. Campbell Morgan confessed that although he was the great minister of the church that he was in London, and seen thousands and thousands of young men and young women from all over the world when they came to London come to his church, and as well as many people in and around London, said to the church in one of his last sermons, he had a confession to make that he and the church hadn't been 12 feet from the front door to witness for Jesus. Never reached out to the local community. A witnessing church. Now, if you have a local church that's a caring church, oh, I said the witnessing church. There was another thing on the witnessing church, which is that the witnessing church needs to send evangelists into the world, dedicated men and women with the gospel of Jesus Christ to send. You need to be a sending church. One of my heroes was W.E. Vine, and I think he used to have 6 secretaries because the movement known as Echoes of Service used to minister to 1,000 missionaries on the mission field. Can you imagine that? Churches sending individuals out with the gospel of Jesus Christ to north, south, and east, west with the gospel. It was wonderful. The church is across the world, and to them we share our wealth, our riches, And to those we become the missionary church. So our church should become known as a local church, of course, a caring church, and also a witnessing church, but it should become that missionary church. Boy in his Bible speaking. God bless you. See you soon.